think that the challenges that women entrepreneurs or startups have historically faced mean that we will always be underrepresented sourcing venture? I know from your perspective that what I'm hearing is that you see that most women that pitch and have a good company or a good idea would get funded, but in Europe it is very different, as you may know because you have done some work in Europe. And I think it's probably still here. You read articles about women, should women have different funding models rather than the usual venture funding model, in other words, debt-based funding or getting help from friends, you know, social funding or things like that, rather than going for venture capital. So there must be some obstacles for women in some sectors. So I'm wondering... yeah.
I mean, personally, I would just be very hesitant to say there should be different structures for different genders. That doesn't feel quite right. But
no.
Doing something that, but you know, I think every entrepreneur needs to be needs to take advantage of any funding opportunity that, or needs to at least be aware of and pursue whatever funding opportunities there are. Mm-hmm. And so maybe, you know, being, you know, if it's appropriate for your business and you want to do it, you'll go into venture and it's available to you. Going the venture funding route is great. Yeah. You know, but for many of the startups for which that's not, in fact, most startups for which that's not the right path. Yes. You know, I think, sure, I mean, perhaps it's an educational problem and sort of increasing the awareness of, you know, of kind of friend and family and angel groups and small government loans and all those types of things that can kind of get you past that first step of getting the business established.
Okay. How do you feel about incubators? Do you think that this is a way that more women could achieve funding?
I don't know that incubators have any better results on gender ratios than seed stage investment firms, so or venture capital firms investing. So I'm not sure they're really solving any problem. I mean, they're. I mean, I think they're great if you're in a position where you can drop everything for 3 months and move and focus on building your business for that time. You know, I'm you know, excited to see anything that kind of draws more innovation. I think it's really important for this country to continue to drive innovation, and that's really what ultimately grows, you know, grows the economy, grows jobs, all those kinds of good things. So I'm not sure there's anything. I haven't seen anything. Maybe I just missed it. Particularly beneficial for women entrepreneurs in that model.
I think one of the arguments for XX Combinator was that on Fred Wilson's blog, there was a few posts, was basically that a lot of women can't uproot themselves for 3 months, but then also a lot of fathers of children can't do that as well.
I think you often see a very young average age in those incubators because those are the folks, and you know, and I think because men are at that age are more likely to take those risks than women. Because it's, I think, in many cases, an irrational risk to take. Well, entrepreneurship is probably an irrational risk at any age, but even more so when you don't, you know, when you're earlier in your career. You know, that's who goes to those incubators. So I mean, maybe there's a model that could be very successful. That's a slightly more virtual model that doesn't require the same level of physical, the uprooting and the in-person commitment. Although, you know, you definitely lose something by not having that, but maybe there's some other, other models to experiment with. And then the whole point being, I mean, that there's, you know, that if there is this, you know, kind of underswelling potential of companies that could be started, but are, you know, that could be really interesting to tap into.
Could open up opportunities. Okay. Do you have any tips for women who are currently sourcing venture? Anything that you've learnt the hard way or the easy way that you'd advise?
I mean, it's all the same stuff, right? It's you know, be prepared that you may have to knock on an awful lot of doors and hear an awful lot of no's, or just even worse, hear an awful lot of nothings. And the relationship part really matters. I mean, not only with once you get to the final stages with an investor, but all the people who could potentially make those introductions along the way. I've certainly found that, you know, I take a lot of, you know, meetings with people that are, you know, not always directly related to what I'm doing, but if this looks like there's some interesting area of connection, because you never know where they're going to lead you to, and it's always much easier to get into an investor's office and with a much warmer welcome if you're introduced by somebody they know and respect.
Yes, they all say that. So yes, thank you for that. Would you like to see changes in the venture capital community that could support more women startups? And if so, do you have any ideas about what they would be?
The only thing I would say is that I've heard some people say that that if they're the way they approach investing in entrepreneurs coming in, that they're gender blind, they don't pay attention, that it doesn't really matter to them, and I don't think that helps the issue. I mean, in my mind, in the way and so some of this comes from my definitely sort of amateur but excessive reading of psychology and topics like that. Gender does matter. I mean, nobody's coming in and saying it doesn't matter. It doesn't impact the person that you are. And it would just be sort of. And I think what's actually much more important is that people kind of recognize their biases or recognize they might have them. And so whether you're whatever gender you are on either side of the table, I think by just saying it doesn't matter, I think you're sweeping a problem which all these numbers say something's going on here, right? Something's got to exist. And and so the better thing I think to do is say, am I treating this person any differently? Are there any things going on in my head as I kind of interact in this conversation that might be impacting my perception of them? And this stuff doesn't change overnight, but I think if would be in a lot of the methodologies that are successful in other areas of life would say that that's more likely to be successful in having people change their some of those potentially ultimate behaviors.
So raising awareness both on the venture capitalist side, but also on women's side. Going into pitch to realise that there may be those sort of obstacles and having the skills and tools
that you may be perceiving this person a little differently, and some of the and on both sides it probably helps to learn more about communication styles. I mean, I remember when I was at MIT and you go into a math test or whatever, all the guys would come out bragging about how well they did, and all the women would come out feeling like they just failed. Turns out the scores were all the same, right? I mean, the average for the two genders wasn't any different. But the style in which they present it is actually quite different, and it's probably only the braggarts of both groups that end up going on to be entrepreneurs, because you've got to have a bit of that bravado to even get over the line. But I mean, whichever side you're on, I think it's helpful to recognize that there may be communication differences, and to factor that into how you're perceiving the person across the table.
And I think you put your finger on the pulse, really, because we all spring out of the same culture. And it really is in the culture that we're raised as women in a maybe even subtly different ways than possibly.
I think it's very explicitly different ways, but we're also explicitly different, right? So it's not shocking that we're raised differently. It's just that I think there's a hidden assumption that impacts our ability to start and run successful companies, and unfortunately the data, because not many people even try to do it, the numbers are quite low, and so I think this is the kind of thing where it's really how do we increase the funnel earlier on, and then for the women who are in the process now, how do we keep minds open and just kind of pull out some of these ways that we think about the people on the other side of the table that may be destructive to creating value, because we're all here to have impact and create value, but if you don't take advantage of the opportunity in terms of an investment or starting a company, then you're not creating that value, and that's a pity for everybody.
Yes, exactly, the whole community. You're a technical co-founder, and do you believe that it's easier for technical women founders to achieve venture funding than non-technical? And if so, what are your reasons for this?
I think it certainly doesn't hurt, and I have to say I don't write any of the code. I wrote a very small amount, and then we threw it away as quickly as possible. But I do have a technical background and technical degrees, and I think that just helps with that credibility thing. It certainly helped by having gone to MIT with the MIT network, because that's just very helpful. So from that perspective, that would probably be similar for men as well, but it's certainly just because of the underlying biases and perception.
Could you list some of the advantages of gender diversity in a startup? Are there any disadvantages? Because obviously you're a woman and you have had your own startups and you're working with men.
I'm trying to think if there's any good. I think it, to some degree, it depends on the population you're serving. I mean, what's most important is that you have, say, sort of the best people, for each particular role that you can find to that can work together. So obviously a very important piece of it to build the product or service that you're then selling. And I mean, I can certainly say that if you're only paying attention to kind of one gender and for as you look at potential individuals for any of these roles, you're very likely not going to. You may miss out on some very interesting folks and someone who could really be the difference between success and failure. I think there's I'm hesitant to sort of talk about the personality differences of men and women. I mean, they're obviously there, and I think having some gender balance, I think, can create a more I guess it could at least create a less macho culture than one that was certainly all male or predominantly so. But I think regardless, I think it's really important that you have a constructive culture where people can talk about and disagree in a way that everyone can walk away and still feel like that okay, we decided to go this way, but I was heard and I understand why we're going this way, even if
So no matter what their what gender there is, everyone's got an ability to contribute. But then and to argue, but then to agree and move on.
Very good. So I think and I think it's possible that having some I don't know for. I guess because of my presence, I've never been in a purely male environment. Although I will say with those that are more male, I tend to be more macho. And such, which can take away from certain people wanting to contribute.
Just one last question. I interviewed Cindy Gallup a while ago, and she quoted Madeleine Albright, who said, "There's a special place in hell reserved for women who don't help other women." How would you see us supporting each other in beefing up these numbers and making women entrepreneurs and startups a much more a bigger population?
I mean, I think there's some bigger groups that have been making wonderful inroads on that, like Astia, kind of more nationally, or Women 2.0, which is lots of presence, and I think those are. Very helpful in just kind of raising awareness and getting large groups of people together and all the programs that they run. I think for this specific group of entrepreneurs, I think it's actually small networks that are also kind of overlaid on that are really important. And so having a few, at least for me, this has certainly been important, having a few other kind of female entrepreneur friends with whom you can compare notes and commiserate, and also of course compare business strategies and everything else is very helpful. Of course, you want to do that with the men too. I mean, you've got they're most of the network still, at least if you're doing anything to do with technology.
And keep that balance.
You got to keep that balance. But I think for if I was just starting out, I would be looking to get involved with both those groups, kind of the bigger, more known ones, and then also try to build a personal network of female entrepreneurs that can kind of help translate some of the stuff that's going on along the way.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time and for participating in this project.
Thank you.